Jeep.
Good morning, America. Breaking overnight, the UN calls an emergency meeting over the crisis in Syria as more disturbing images emerge of Syria's chemical attack against its own people. The death toll grows this morning, dozens killed, including children. The White House now responds, condemning the Assad regime and also blaming President Obama.
Ivanka Trump defends her new role in the White House, taking on those claims she's complicit in her father's decisions, saying she's trying to be a force for good. And the healthcare battle is back. President Trump making a new push to pass his plan. The vice president meeting with key GOP lawmakers overnight, trying to salvage a deal.
Severe weather outbreak. Tornadoes reported through the south, destroying a fire department and ripping apart a school. The dangerous weather on the move. The entire East Coast now on alert.
An ad outrage. The new Pepsi commercial featuring Kendall Jenner sparking a huge firestorm, using protesters and police to sell soda. Critics calling it tone deaf, social media having a field day. Will the ad be pulled?
Live in Times Square, this is GMA with Robin Roberts, George Stephanopoulos, and Michael Strahan.
Good morning, America. It is a busy Wednesday morning right here. And boy, you got to say, if Kendall Jenner and Pepsi wanted some attention, they got it.
Yeah, they're getting a lot of it this morning. A lot of backlash this morning as well. It's being compared to this famous image of a Black Lives Matter protester. And a lot of people taking exception to that.
Perhaps not the attention Pepsi was hoping for. We're going to have much more on that coming up. But first, President Trump facing one of his first major challenges overseas, the crisis in Syria. The White House is condemning that chemical attack that killed dozens of people, the worst there in years. And the UN Security Council is now holding an emergency meeting about this today. Our chief investigative correspondent Brian Ross is here with all the latest. Good morning, Brian.
Well, good morning, Amy. With the United Nations Security Council set to meet here in New York later this morning, the question is whether the civilized world will do anything to stop what's happening in Syria, a barbaric, calculated military tactic to instill terror, producing a video record that cannot be ignored even as it's difficult to watch. In fact, we're not going to show you the worst of the image because they're simply too horrific. Officials this morning say they do not yet know for sure what gas or chemical was used by the Syrians to attack this city. But whatever it is, the most rescue workers can do is to try to wash the chemicals off as young victims cling to life, struggling to breathe as their lungs collapse.
The gas attacks are continuing every day, and no one is doing anything to stop these gas attacks.
It is all so very sad and an ugly chapter of history.
The repeated use of chemicals as weapons in Syria is one of the most widespread cases of chemicals used as weapons in modern history.
While this local activist reported from one of the hospitals, a follow-on bomb attack put the medical facility out of action. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer called the attacks reprehensible, but added,
"These heinous actions by the Bashar al-Assad regime are a consequence of the past administration's weakness and irresolution."
It was 2 years ago that President Obama told the world this would not happen.
Assad gave up his chemical weapons. And that's not speculation on our part. That, in fact, has been confirmed by the organization internationally that is charged with eliminating chemical weapons.
Now, 2 years later, what has happened here has made a mockery of the president's words. In effect, the Syrian government, with the support of Russia, is now daring the U.S. and President Trump to do something to stop them, seemingly indifferent to international treaties that make what's happening there a war crime. When President Obama was considering military action 4 years ago, Donald Trump tweeted, "President Obama, don't attack Syria. There's no upside, tremendous downside." Amy?
Brian, today we are hearing a questionable response as to what happened from the Russians.
That's right. The Russian Defense Ministry is claiming the chemicals released from a rebel-controlled bomb factory after it was hit by a Syrian airstrike. Weapons experts tell us that makes no sense, and they say the evidence is overwhelming. This is a result of a Syrian government attack, Amy.
All right, Brian, thank you.
Okay, let's get more on that now from our Chief Global Affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz. And Martha, let's pick up on the pressure now facing the Trump administration. More pressure to act right now, but not only in that tweet in 2013, but all through last year's campaign. The president saying we have to stay out of Syria. Syria is not our problem. Now it is his problem.
It really is, and he can blame President Obama, and certainly it was President Obama who drew that red line. President Trump has not drawn any sort of red line, but President Trump is in charge now, and the people who elected him want him to do something. They elected him because they didn't like some of Barack Obama's policies. What President Trump does is totally unclear at this point, George. He has been concentrating on ISIS, not Bashar al-Assad, not getting Bashar al-Assad out of office.
And in fact, just the other day, Press Secretary Sean Spicer said basically it's realistic to expect that Assad is going to remain in place. We also saw something of a contradiction between President Trump's statement, which was blaming President Obama, and the Secretary of State's statement, which put more pressure on Iran and Russia.
Yeah, Rex Tillerson putting a lot of pressure on Iran and Russia. We have seen in this White House sometimes different statements from the Secretary of State and from the President. I think the President's statement was much more political. Rex Tillerson is now Secretary of State. He has career officers around him, Foreign Service officers, who probably crafted that statement. I think that's part of the difference, but very mixed messages you're getting.
Okay, Martha Raddatz, thank you. We have a second national security challenge breaking overnight. North Korea test-fired another missile designed to carry a nuclear warhead. Chief White House correspondent John Karl tracking that. And John, the timing here, no accident at all, right before President Trump's meeting with the Chinese president tomorrow.
Certainly no accident. This missile launch comes on the eve of the first meeting between President Trump and the president of China, a meeting where the North Korean threat will be at the top of the agenda. Now, U.S. military officials say this was a KN-15 intermediate range missile. It only flew about 37 miles off the east coast of North Korea into the Sea of Japan. But, George, this was a solid fuel rocket. That is concerning because that is the kind of rocket launch that is much harder to detect. But the only response from the administration so far is a terse statement from Secretary of State Tillerson saying, quote, "The United States has spoken enough about North Korea. We have no further comment." But President Trump had some pointed words about North Korea and China just over the weekend. In an interview with the Financial Times, he said, "China has great influence over North Korea, and China will either decide to help us with North Korea or they won't. If they do, that will be very good for China. If they don't, it won't be good for anyone." And then, George, he added this: "If China is not going to help solve North Korea, we will." Of course, no indication how the administration
that
would
is
do
the big problem. When it comes to the how, there are no real good options. North Korea has been impervious to pressure, and a military strike raises the possibility of retaliation against South Korea.
Absolutely, and there's nothing further to be done in terms of economic sanctions. It leaves very little further by way of escalating, but from the United States, other than military option, which there really is not a good military option.
Okay, John Karl, thanks very much.
We are covering a number of other big stories coming out of Washington. A battle underway on Capitol Hill over President Trump's Supreme Court nominee. Republicans and Democrats debating through the night, and that vote is set for tomorrow morning. An Obama National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, back in the news, accused of asking for the identities of Trump transition officials named in intelligence reports. Rice says it was legal and proper to get those names, and she denies making any of it public. On the health care front, lawmakers have renewed talks. Vice President Pence going to Capitol Hill overnight, trying to relaunch the effort to repeal and replace Obamacare. Our congressional correspondent Mary Bruce starts us off from Capitol Hill with all of that. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, Amy. Yeah, the vice president was here last night meeting with key Republicans for 2 hours, but still no agreement and no actual legislation. The White House is now eager to bring healthcare reform back to life and finally get this done. They're even willing to make changes to things that the president promised he wouldn't touch, like protections for people with pre-existing conditions. Under a new plan, those patients could see their healthcare costs skyrocket. The White House is also now considering letting states opt out of a requirement that insurers cover some basic health care services, but it is simply not clear if all of this is going to be enough to get this done, especially for those ultra-conservatives who are the ones who blocked the first attempt.
Right. So, Mary, the White House obviously needs to strike that deal with conservative members, but where does that leave the moderates? Are they going to be able to support this version?
Yeah, Amy, this is all a delicate balancing act. Any concessions that are made to those conservatives risk the moderates. It's what brought down the bill the first go-round. The question now is whether they can strike that balance. And this morning, it seems they simply haven't reached a consensus that doesn't tip the scale too far in one direction or another. Amy.
All right, Mary Bruce, thanks so much. George.
Okay, Amy, now we're going to dig into that story about Obama National Security Advisor Susan Rice and the questions over how and why she unmasked Trump administration officials named in intelligence reports. Now, that term unmasking is new for most of us. Here's how it works. When the U.S. spies on a foreign target, an American may get caught up in the surveillance. Those names are not revealed. John Smith becomes U.S. person. But national security officials can ask for the names to be unmasked if they feel it's necessary to understand the intelligence. Unmasking is legal. Rules are in place for how it's done. Leaking an unmasked name to the press is not legal. ABC's Cecilia Vegas covering the story from the White House. Good morning, Cecilia.
George, good morning to you. And there is a strong denial from Susan Rice. She said she did not leak any of those unmasked names, and she said she did nothing illegal. But Democrats and Republicans see this one very differently. The left sees Susan Rice as a scapegoat. The right sees her as the smoking gun that proves the president's wiretapping claims.
This morning, allies of President Trump joining in a chorus of anger. 3 Republican members of Congress sending this letter to Senate and House Intelligence Committees demanding that President Obama's former national security advisor be called to testify, saying that Susan Rice's behavior appears negligent at best and criminal at worst. To them, she could be the smoking gun that proves President Obama wiretapped President Trump. But from Rice, a firm denial.
I leaked nothing to nobody and never have and never would.
She does admit that she asked to unmask the identities of Americans picked up by surveillance. But she says it was all part of her job.
This is not anything political has been alleged. That's absolutely false. We can't be passive consumers of this information and do our jobs effectively to protect the American people.
Rice would not name names, but sources tell ABC News that as the intelligence community investigated Russia's election meddling, in some cases, Trump campaign and transition officials were caught up in surveillance. Rice requesting their identities. Republican lawmakers outraged.
So if this is what people are saying it is, this is totally unusual and I think totally wrong and inappropriate.
And Senator Rand Paul tweeting, "Smoking gun found." But Rice says there was nothing illegal and there was no wiretapping.
The intelligence community, the director of the FBI, has made that very clear. There was no such collection surveillance on Trump Tower or Trump individuals.
So an adamant denial there. Another Republican calls Rice the typhoid Mary of the Obama administration. Surprisingly, the White House has been pretty restrained on this one. George, Sean Spicer calling these reports about Rice and unmasking troubling.
Okay, Cecilia, thanks very much. Let's bring in John Avlon, editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, also author of the new book, Washington's Farewell, Founding Fathers' Warning to Future Generations. Thanks for coming in.
Great.
John, let's try to unpack this whole unmasking controversy, if it is indeed a controversy. As Cecilia said in the piece, unmasking legal, proper, routine for national security officials. If that information were leaked, that would be a problem.
Yes. That's exactly right, but there's not evidence of this point. It also goes to the intent of any unmasking. What's happening here is obviously it's the politicization of national security, an attempt to deflect from the focus of much of the energetic point on Capitol Hill right now, which is the FBI investigation about possible Russian contact with the Trump transition and campaign. But this is being pumped up by partisan media as something at least equivalent to validate the president's claims. And so expect a lot more.
Nothing to do with the president's claims about wiretapping.
Nothing to do with wiretapping at all. But that distinction is without a difference to most hardcore partisans right now, who are desperately trying to either defend the president or deflect away from the main investigation.
Also in Washington, it's a busy, busy week in Washington right now. It's going on right now on the floor of the Senate. You see this filibuster by the Democrats. Jeff Merkley, the senator from Oregon, is right there talking. He's been talking through the night about Judge Gorsuch. Now, this is over, though. Come Friday, Judge Gorsuch is going to be Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. I guess the question is, will this change in the rules, this nuclear option, what kind of impact will it have down the road?
Look, and that's the real story. Cut to the chase. You know, Mitch McConnell pulls the nuclear option. Gorsuch becomes a Supreme Court Justice. But it's the change of raising that level to a Supreme Court Justice. That is a change in precedent. And Democrats knew that endgame when they opposed him. And here's the real problem. The standard, as you know, isn't whether you disagree with the judge. It's whether he's qualified to sit. And he presented himself as a conservative but a conciliator. And that makes it very difficult to hold that line. So now the nuclear option applies to Supreme Court justices. Will the filibuster stand in other areas?
We will see how it plays out. Ivanka Trump stepping out a little bit. She's now an official White House employee, gave an interview just yesterday where she took on that ad in Saturday Night Live where, you know, the perfume ad, complicit. Here was her answer.
If being complicit is wanting to be a force for good and to make a positive impact, then I'm complicit.
Now, it has been reported that she has been a moderating influence on her father. She also said she disagrees with him at times. But now you've got the situation where Ivanka and her husband, Jared, in many ways, the two most powerful people next to the president in the White House.
Yeah, that's a problem within most American standards. I mean, it's nepotism. It's a princeling phenomenon. And obviously, that's not the definition of complicit. The idea is if you're going to stand for certain values, you're going to fight for them in the White House. And how did you get there? And if it's purely based on bloodline, not personal experience, that's a problem outside America's best traditions. So that's something that they're going to have to confront and prove themselves in the line of fire.
John Evelyn, thanks very much for coming in. Michael?
All right, thank you, George. We're going to turn now to some good news for parents. If your children have made unauthorized purchases on your Amazon app, you may soon be able to get a refund. And our chief business correspondent, Rebecca Jarvis, is here with the details. Hey, Rebecca.
Hey, good morning. And we see this all the time. We're hearing all of these stories. Well, now Amazon is agreeing to pay out $70 million to families whose kids bought things off the app while they were playing free games. The FTC says Amazon didn't warn parents that the free games could do that. We've seen Google and Apple settle similar claims, and they all say they've updated their programs. But ultimately, all these companies, they want to do business online and make it easy to buy. The problem is when it's so easy, your kid's playing on the phone or tablet. So for consumers, it can cause real headaches. Even Kanye West has ranted against this on Twitter, specifically going after the game companies that put in-app purchases in kids' games, tweeting, "We give the iPad to our child, and every 5 minutes, there's a new purchase." Not exactly the coldest story ever told. But how could they be so heartless, Michael?
Ding, ding, ding,
But
if Kanye's tweeting about it, it's serious.
Exactly.
But we've all heard these stories about the kids who ordered things also with the virtual assistant.
Heard them, we live them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we hear about this all the
Alexa,
time.
yeah, right.
Yeah, Alexa. I've been in the room with an Alexa before, and she starts responding. You're not exactly anticipating it. Well, for parents, there is some good news. All you have to do is return the product. You go through the typical returns process. And for parents who want to add an additional layer of security, you can set up a confirmation code through the Alexa app. From then on, it's going to ask you for that code. Make sure that you're actually on board with buying whatever Alexa has.
On this yesterday, it made my day. I showed it to both my daughters. See, you can't get away with it anymore.
George, let me tell you, they'll figure a way around.
Yeah, exactly.
You're right about that.
A lot of parents are happy to hear that. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And we're going to turn now to the severe weather that's been across the South. Reported tornadoes hitting Missouri overnight, damaging a school and fire department. It's just the latest in a week of extreme weather with 31 reported tornadoes, more than 450 reports of severe weather, and 6 storm-related deaths. Now, 54 million people are in the crosshairs. Alabama's governor already declared a state of emergency before the next storm moves in. Rob Marciano, he's here, and he's been tracking it all. Good morning, Rob.
Hey, good morning, Michael. We are making up for last year, which was relatively quiet. A reported tornado hitting last night in Goodman, Missouri. You just spoke about it. The fire department torn up there, the elementary school, several homes as well. Luckily, no serious injuries. Now we're watching this storm. It's going to track east, and already we have a severe thunderstorm watch out for much of Alabama and Georgia. This is the first of several rounds that are going to come through as the larger storm across the Midwest and the heartland taps some moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, some jet energy here. And so we got a moderate risk from Montgomery, Macon, Atlanta, almost up into Nashville. And the entire risk actually goes into the Ohio River Valley as well. And then tonight and tomorrow we get into the mid-Atlantic for a messy day across the Northeast. More on that later. For now, though, your Stormy Cities brought to you by Wjla.
I believe computers are important in design, but it's the human touch that creates design with feeling, creating a form that appeals to your heart.
Why are we so passionate about perfecting designs by hand? Because driving matters. Introducing the all-new Mazda CX-5.
Well,
on this Tuesday, we're not going to get up to 80 degrees, as was the case yesterday, but we'll take the 70s, still above average, and still in short sleeves and sunglasses for today. Absolutely gorgeous. Meanwhile, tomorrow is going to be stormy. In fact, looking like a weather alert day from Storm Watch 7. Everywhere along and east of I-95, slight risk of severe thunderstorm, enhanced risk down through here, south of D.C. In fact, even the possibility of a brief tornado. We're much cooler after that, into the 50s Friday on through the weekend.